Driving forces is one of the sciences that we assess using the Trimetrics DNA leadership assessment. Everybody here except for Karina has completed that assessment. So Karina, you and I can talk about that offline another time. So you've a bit of context here, but it's a driving force. I feel like it's like I don't always get to it because there's just so much meat with the disc and the behaviors section of that assessment. Like there's just so much great learning there that I sometimes just put driving forces on the back burner. But it's still a really, really, really important science to know about yourself, to help continue to cultivate that personal awareness around yourself. Because as you know, and I use this language often, is that when we know about ourselves, we can really articulate and operate in our zone of genius. And when we operate in our zone of genius, we're doing our best. It's just a win-win-win. So driving forces is that second science in the behavior assessment tool. And unlike DISC, which is behaviors, it's not necessarily something that's observable. DISC is an observable science, whereas driving forces, you sort of have to know it to pay attention to it. And why it matters, so I'm just going to share my screen now. Give me 1 second here. So why it matters is because when our driving forces are, hold on, sorry team. Are you looking at driving forces or are you looking at my assessment?
Driving forces, Google Doc.
Perfect, thank you. When our driving forces are sort of engaged, again, just hit the wrong button. They're activated, we are engaged at work. And everybody here knows that when we are engaged at work, we're going to win for work all day long. Engagement drives performance, which drives results. And so when we are lit up, when we are happy, we are then better able to do our work. And so this conversation of like working from the office versus working from home is sort of a really interesting conversation, because that could really influence an employee's ability to be engaged. So really today is about giving you that high level look again about what are driving forces and how can I leverage this learning in my own roles, in my own leadership, and how can I leverage this learning for my team? What can it tell me about my team and what we're facing right now? How is this playing into the synergies that make my team amazing? And how is this playing into any sort of conflict that we might be experiencing? So that's what I want you to be paying attention to as I go through describing driving forces. So they are the why of our actions. They help drive our choices, our decision making. They create engagement when they are fulfilled. So as I said in this image here, driving forces are sort of what happens underneath the water. Disc and behaviors are observable. We can see that in people. But driving forces aren't always that obvious. But once we start paying attention to them, we can start paying attention to what motivates us, what we care about. So arguably, we might say, and I'll get into this later, a lot of you showed up today because you hold a strong driving force for intellectual. You like to learn. We're always learning. So that might be debatable for some of you, but for the most part, I would argue most of the people on the call today have a strong intellectual driving force. They place there's the place where you make decision from, like they influence your decisions. You're going to see why in just a second. They say they will change about 7 times in our lifetime, but really that can be like circumstantial depending on the different phases that we are experiencing. And what's really most important with any of this stuff is that there's no good or bad. There's no ideal driving forces makeup. That your driving forces are just your driving forces. Are certain driving forces maybe better suited to different industries, different businesses? Probably. You might be it would be really hard for someone who had this strong altruistic driving force to then be working in New York for a hedge fund company. Like when we have these really extreme opposites, we can see how they can play into it. but there's no good or bad. And that's really, really important to hit home with any of these assessments. Your unique makeup is your amazing, unique makeup. So why, like, what are the benefits? Build stronger relationships, understand the culture within your organization in terms of like, what is the synergy that makes us really great and how do we continue to capitalize on that? Communicate more effectively with others, similar to DISC, like be really weary of what's important to them, what's driving their decision making, and sort of being aware of that in your conversations. Like I mentioned earlier, when we're hiring people, if we know that they have a strong altruistic driving force, and we are sort of a hyper growth tech startup, that might not necessarily lend to a great fit for the organization. So really knowing what the makeup of the organization's driving forces are, and making sure that the people that we're hiring have that same fit so that they're happy. And ultimately, when we can, as managers, as leaders, know what drives our people and we can orient them in the right direction, we're going to get the most out of them through engagement, which I've already alluded to. So here are the 6 driving forces. So if you look at the circle in the middle, like that is the main topic. These driving forces are all rooted in the work of a German psychologist named Carl Springer. Candace, correct me if I've gotten any names wrong. And so these go way back, probably 100 years or so. Like they've been evolving in the 20th century, I would say. And the language used has evolved. I will say one of the limiting factors with driving forces is I personally feel like the language isn't as intuitive as one might think. So it can take a few go rounds with it to know it and understand what it means. But really, it's an evolution of this work that this psychologist has done in the last, let's say, 50 or 60 years. So at the top, we have knowledge, how we go about seeking information. Then we have utility. So another word I like to use instead of utility is tasks, how we go about tasks. Next driving force is surroundings. Next is others, that's people, like how we go about relationships and people. Next is power. So power can be sort of a triggering word for people, but it's really about autonomy, maybe freedom, how we go about those topics. And then finally is methodologies. Like, is there like a defined system that we like to operate from? So those are the 6 main topics. And what we find is that we operate somewhere on a spectrum of each one of those driving forces. So on the one hand, with knowledge, we have someone that is instinctive, someone who likes to use their instinct, someone who likes to use their past experiences to inform how they're going to go about seeking new information. On the other hand, we have intellectual, someone who just loves to read, someone who is constantly learning, constantly wanting to know what the literature has to say about that. Next, we have utility and tasks. So that idea of tasks. On the one hand, we have selfless. Those are the people who really believe in doing things a certain way and will give things all the time and attention and resources it needs to be done properly. They can also sort of become spontaneous and maybe a little bit impulsive with new ideas. On the other side, we have resourceful, people who say, like, if I just have an hour to get this thing done, I'm going to be okay with it being at 60% rather than it being 110%. They believe on the ROI, return on investment, for sort of the input that they're putting into something. Our surroundings, on the one hand, is like the actual physical surroundings, like what we can see, but there's also like the intangible surroundings, like the ecosystem, what we can't always see, but we can feel. So on the one hand, we have people who can walk into a room with an objective viewpoint and be like, yeah, that desk is set up well, that chair is in the right place, the audience can see me if I'm standing on the stage. Like, they're going to look at the makeup of the room, the functionality of a space, and say, that works. versus someone who's going to walk into a room and say, the light is terrible, that paint is great, this needs some fresh flowers, this is, this makes me feel good. This is a really interesting driving force for me because I see this showing up in organizations in really unique ways. So conflict in an organization that I was working with, because one of the senior leaders chose to work at a WeWork offices versus the head office. And so everybody thought that that person just didn't care about the team, and they sort of resented him for that. Whereas he was just really motivated by like a beautiful space, and their space was old and dusty. And so he just opted out. But once they sort of learned that about him, that his space, his environment is really important to him, that could create a new conversation. The other thing I want to say about surroundings is people that are harmonious, I feel like, have that superpower to check in with like what's happening culturally. They can feel it, they can sense it. What is happening in this organization that's not being said? Versus someone who's objective, who's just like, they might not feel as much. They might just sort of like see and like go and like try and resolve, versus someone who's harmonious that might just like want to keep the peace. I can go on and on and on all of these, so I'm just gonna keep moving along. The next is that others driving force, which is all about people. So on the one hand, we have someone that's intentional, and then on the other hand, who believes in a give and take in relationship. And on the other hand, we have someone that's altruistic, that like, it doesn't matter, there is no give and take. I'm here to give. I'm here on this earth to like just give and give and make it a better place for people. So therefore, that is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to keep score, if you will. That next one is power. I mentioned sort of autonomy and freedom as sort of being a key word there. On the one hand, we have people that really just want to be a part of a team and collaborate and like share from one another. And then on the other hand, we have someone that is commanding, who's just like sets these milestones for themselves and like are just going to go for it. Like they are not going to let anyone slow them down. They just want to go for it. And that like milestones and just like achieving goals and autonomy is just really, really important to someone that has that commanding driving force. Next is receptive. So people who, when it comes to like a way to do something, they're open to like thinking outside the box. That just because this is the way that we've always done it doesn't mean that's important for me right now. I'm going to explore new and different ways to think outside the box, versus someone who is structured, who's like, why would you think outside the box? This has already been solved for. Let's just follow the steps in front of us and play by these rules and know that the outcome is going to be certain. So those are the 6 main driving forces with the continuum of each. The question I have for you guys is, which of these would you say is really a driving force it's a primary driving force that's important for you in your day-to-day job? So whether you know it because you've done the assessment or you don't, which of these driving forces stand out for you as like, that is totally me? I am that harmonious person that needs a nice, beautiful workspace, like great harmony in the team. Like that really is going to make me happy. So take a look at that list and then pop into the chat which driving force you think most resonates for you. And then I'm probably just going to call you on it to share a little bit with the group. Karina, I'm going to call on you. Tell us about what you know about your resourceful driving force. Why is that important to you? And how has that shown up for you in the past?
It shows up by like execution, trumping strategy from time to time. And especially in the eliminating waste, is actually a language we use in agile development, right? Find ways to collaborate better and to eliminate redundant tasks and also do more automation and such. And that's one of my expertise. And I find that sometimes I really don't have the end vision, but I compensate on performance of getting people engaged into doing the next milestone, not necessarily the next like the plan, like the end goal, but like the next milestone, and then we work together. And I find that I'm able to bring those resources to the table, to the team. It's a bit intentional in a way, but I find that it's more the resourceful, just connected closer.
Can I ask you, so on the opposite end of that spectrum is this selfless driving force. Has there been a time where you've come up against someone on your team that has this selfless driving force that really has this need to like make sure it's perfect before we activate it? So have you come up against that, and how have you managed that in the past?
Yeah, I come up with that a lot, actually. Has been a challenge, especially like when you're dealing with the transformation, like digital transformation for the whole organization. Those that want like that waterfall plan to go into an agile transformation, um, it's not viable to know every ins and outs, but then you need to make sure that they are included into the conversation, updated, know why we're doing, how we're doing, what is in for them and for their department. And sometimes you need to rely on like, hey, you just got to trust me on this one, prove them like with the small wins, and then get their buy-in to continue moving forward. But then asking the questions on like what is their fear is all about and what do they need, has come a long way. I don't think I always answered those fears. Like I didn't provide a full plan for every single task that we went to it, but I was able to answer some of those questions before.
Right.
Embracing more than like getting defensive. In the beginning, I used to get a lot like defensive with that type of behavior. Now I find that, especially after our book, Never Split the Difference, embracing the no, the negative was great. Yeah.
That's great. I think so. What I really want to clarify about what I heard you say, Karina, for everybody to pay attention to is that when we see a resourceful and a selfless sort of at odds with each other, what Karina has learned is to like manage her defensiveness, to become curious, ask more questions, try and get to the root fear of what might be stopping this person from just launching and going. And finally, really clarifying, amplifying any of the wins that have resulted in moving this project forward faster than what a selfless person might have felt comfortable with. I literally just finished a conversation on this topic where I was like, it won't be until this person starts experiencing some of those wins will they be able to move forward more. As many of you know, my husband has a background in sport, and we always used to say, winning breeds winning. Winning breeds winning. So when we get those small incremental wins, it can create that snowball effect towards momentum. That's fantastic. Really understanding under what circumstances do I play to my strength? That's my primary driving force. And under what conditions do I need to like back away from it and actually maybe be a little less resourceful and allow selfless to show up so that, you know, the full makeup of what this project is meant to be is like showing itself, you know? So there is a nuance to knowing who we are and how that plays to our advantage or how it's our Achilles heel. Candace, thanks. Tell me what you're thinking, what you're seeing.
Okay, yeah. So because I also scored high in commanding, and I really struggled with the it appeared as though I wasn't collaborative, and yet I do see myself as a very collaborative person. And so, you know, I think a couple of things are worth noting. So one is this is where the language can hang us up if we don't sort of really dig in and understand, you know, what this is intending. But when it comes to like that choice of like, am I driven by sort of like forming my own destiny, or am I driven by like sort of almost handing that over to the group? Then that's, we have to just remember the context of this. And it doesn't mean that a person who scores high in commanding isn't collaborative. Like we can behave that way very well.
Totally.
And so like for me, like I'm I tip a bit to the intentional. And so because I really care about, in terms of others, being purposeful with them and finding those win-wins, then even though when it comes to who's going to be in control of my destiny, then it's me. And that's my commanding shows up, because my others is high around intentional, then I'm still also looking for that win-win, which I achieve through collaboration
And people.
and people. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Is that helpful? Everybody give us the thumbs up. How she clarified that there? No.
Also wonder, I don't want to dwell too much on commanding, but I also score high on commanding. But I also wonder if it's because like I haven't had enough wins. Like I need to take things into my own hands to kind of ensure that success and get that recognition. And then once that you have that, then you can lean to be more collaborative because you're trying to prove yourself a little bit less. Like I just wonder in terms of like different points in our careers or in our businesses, if that could change in one of the 7 pivots.
Potentially. What I'm curious about right now is how many people right now in this group, Karina, you're the only person that doesn't know, but everybody else who has commanding in their top 4, put up your hand. Karina Baldwin, you do, don't you?
I'm trying to find my, I'm like, do I?
And Jazz, you don't have it in your top 4? Come on.
No, I don't. It's 6. It's number 6.
Is it above or below collaboration?
Oh, above. Like there's a big gap between those two.
Yeah, I feel like the thing that I'm fishing for is, so this is the thing with these assessments and these tools is like hires like, and that like, there's definitely a profile of the people that I work with, Erin, that there's something to be said, like commanding is commonly in the top 5 or 6 of my clients' profiles. And I don't know, is that because commanding, they're driven to like lead, they're driven to learn more about themselves, like hit those milestones. So I don't know, is it the ecosystem that I create? But I don't know if it's necessarily your stage of your career or just like what's in you. It's like this drive to just like keep growing in your own way. But I could be swayed from that. Candace, what do you think about what my observation is? Do you think there's something to be said or not? Yeah. Anyway, I think what's important to know is really, how has that driving force served you in your career? How do you play to it? How do you amplify it? Because when you can have the autonomy, when you can chase those goals, you're going to feel fulfilled. If you working on a project and team and you've got commanding in you and you don't have that autonomy to go for it, and like you're sort of feeling stifled by the team, that can be a tension point. That could be a tension point for someone with a commanding driving force. The other thing to know, like for example, intellectual is my number 1 driving force. It's like my number 1. And so it's really important to know in extremes how that shows up for you. And so I want to just share a little story. So when I did my MBA, on my final project, I had to do a literature review. And so I was taught that a literature review means you go and you research everything that has to do with that topic. Well, one of the topics in my literature review was organizational culture. And I did not get out of the research phase of I was meant to take 6 months to research and write this paper. I didn't get out of the research phase for 6 months because I literally thought that it was required of me to go and research every possible bit of literature on the topic of culture, which like is an impossible feat. It is a massive topic unto it of itself, but it never dawned on me that I could stop researching at some point. So I take some of the blame for that, of just like loving learning and like just going and going and going with the learning. But I also should have like clarified up front what really was required, that a literature review doesn't need all of the information because it was just a losing battle. I got stuck. So under extremes, it can be an Achilles heel. It can be something that holds us back, just like anything. It's a blessing and a curse. So paying attention to your driving forces, those primary driving forces, and how they serve you to be second. So we have our primary cluster of driving forces where, like, when those top four are constantly engaged, we are lit up. So know what they are, pay attention to how they show up in your role, and make sure that you're able to honor them as much as possible. Then we have this situational. So Jazz just said her commanding was about 6. So really, under certain situations for Jazz, she's going to show up as commanding or she's going to show up as collaborative. It can be very situational depending on what is going on. She'll play into one of those driving forces. And then last is the indifferent. Like, it really doesn't matter. These bottom 4, like, take it or leave it. And usually the bottom 4 are really a reflection of what your strongest top 4 were. Like, if your intellectual is super, super high, then your instinctive is going to be low. So it's a direct correlation to how high you rated your primary. And that's like indifferent. Doesn't really make a difference. The situation doesn't change things. You truly don't really care. So this is a quick snapshot of what my makeup looks like. I know it's a little bit fuzzy, but what I want to orient you towards is, like, you can see in the bubbles, a small bubble, 1, 2, 3, 4. So they're actually numbered, and you can sort of see how things like power, others, and utility for me are pretty balanced. Like, those would be really sort of situational. Whereas intellectual, objective, and receptive are pretty strong for me. They would be in my primary. So I just wanted to illustrate what I mean by primary, situational, indifferent. This is how they show up for me. Now, think about that time. I want you to think about that time where you were challenged at work. Go back to that scenario where you were challenged at work. What do you know about your driving force as we've sort of looked at this? And what could have been the driving force that was being challenged for you? Think about that for a second. So, for example, when I was chatting with Karina, I was like, you're very resourceful, but what do you do when you have someone that's selfless? That's like, no, Karina, we need to think this through more. Like, we need more time. We need more time. That is an example of what I'm talking about. What's the driving force that was challenged? And yeah, what did that look like? So if you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat a driving force that you find yourself challenged by, that would be great. Pop it in there, and then I want to ask someone about it.
So what I was challenged by, I guess?
Yeah. Or which driving force do you think was at the root of the challenge?
I think it was instinctive, because, okay, so the challenge was basically, I was working on a marketing piece, but I needed some information to be like, I always get, like, whenever I'm working on a marketing piece, I get it secondhand because I work in tech. So it's my job to massage it. And the first piece was basically, like, instinct is I think the right word. There was no research involved in the piece. So it ended up me having to, I guess, use my intellectual side and do more research and basically rework the whole thing. So that was pretty frustrating.
So this person just went about this project like, this is what I've done before. This is what I'm going to do for you now. Here you go.
Yeah.
Versus you want research, you want new current trends, like fresh.
Pretty much.
Perfect.
So yeah.
Perfect. That's fantastic. Candice, you said you're sometimes challenged by harmonious. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, it was and so I'm trying to, think through this situation, but yeah, I mean, I was challenged to keep redoing this graph, and the person who was asking me to redo it, and it wasn't because they weren't happy with it, but they just wanted to have lots of options to see what was most beautiful or what, you know, was sort of best. And I was like, but it's done. and the one I've given you like absolutely says what it needs to say for this purpose, for this place, for this time. Like, and you know, and I think like, you know, the first couple, it was like fine, but you know, like after a bit, it's just like, we need to be moving on. Like, and yeah, there may be another version that's a bit more beautiful, but is it gonna get us any further to what needs to happen here? No.
Yeah.
No,
Great.
it was not.
Great.
It didn't need to live anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great example. Eva, what do you want to share?
So I feel like I'm challenged by analytical people because I feel like, let's just do it. Why overanalyze it? It feels good. Let's just go for it and then figure out the rest later. But does my chart, because I'm looking at my chart, does it tell me what I'm challenged by?
Well, it would be the opposite of what your driving forces are. So can you look,
okay.
so then what a few of your driving forces are?
Okay. So then it would be altruistic.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So what I want to share with you guys right now is I just wanted to identify like how we recognize it, how we can look for driving forces in the root of some of the challenges that we're experiencing. I literally, as I mentioned, I just got off a coaching call working with a team in a professional services firm, and they love to just talk. They just love to talk. And is this the best thing? And should we continue to evaluate this? And they just talk and they talk and they talk. And that's because some of the leadership hold that selfless driving force where they will just keep talking. And so we need to look for the root of these things in some of our challenges. All right. So then, so we've talked about it as it relates to you as an individual, but now we need to look at it from our partnership perspective. So can anyone quickly tell me, when looking at the two driving forces of these random people, where would there be synergy between these two people? What do you think makes this partnership really great? It's not tricky, you guys. Just
that they're both average, like they're kind of all in the middle, so they're neither extreme, so they're not competing. Maybe
look at the topics, like look at the actual driving force. Don't look at their results. Like we're looking at their top 4, so all of their results are going to be in the average or a little bit stronger, but look at the actual driving forces.
But they're kind of similar.
So 2 of them are similar: resourceful and intentional.
I thought there was another one. No, maybe not.
They both, in their top 4 driving forces, they both share the driving force of resourceful, and they both share the driving force of intentional. So they both like to get things done. They both believe in the ROA. They would be just like Candace and say, this is done, let's move on. And they both sort of believe, like Eva, that there needs to be a give and a take in a relationship. That it's not just all give all the time, that we have this give and take in our relationship, that maybe in a hair salon, we create some boundaries around, you know, our customers and scheduling and whatnot. So they share 2 of the same driving forces in their top 4 primary, in their primary cluster.
Where does that come out, the give and take? Like what creates?
It's just a definition of intentional. So
Okay.
People who are driven to assist others for a specific purpose. So when I say give and take, it's just, that's the purpose, is sort of a back and forth. Great question, Warren. So you can all see that they have shared 2 of the same driving forces in the top 4, correct? Now, what makes it tricky is that harmonious and objective. This could be a potential trigger for them. This trigger is a strong word, but this could be a potential tension point for them. So Bill, the top performer, might be saying, Alejandro, this place isn't clean enough. It's old, we need some remodeling. And Alejandro's like, no, it's not in the budget. We can't afford it right now. That could show up as a tension point in their relationship. One is very objective, looking for the function, you know, all your stations, they work, they're fine. And then Bill's like, but wait a second, like if we don't stay on top of keeping this fresh and clean, we might lose customers. So that could potentially be a tension point in these people's relationship. So I just share this with you to illustrate how it shows up in our partnerships. You know, I just did some work with two coworkers who have known each other since high school. They've worked together for 10 years, but there's a tension between the two of them that is like really creating like a yucky toxicity in the workplace. And when I sat down to compare their driving forces, most of them were at complete opposites of one another. And so when we were able to talk to each other and be like, she really cares about collaborative and you really care about commanding, how does that show up in the relationship? It allowed them to see each other in these new eyes. So our driving forces can really point to the synergies of what makes a team, a culture, like amazing, or it can also speak to where we might experience that conflict. So this is a comparison between two people, just their top 4, but I also just want you to see how you can do a comparison of a team. So just for the sake of time, I'm just going to show you like this team. This is another different type of professional services team. This team will find synergy in intellectual. They will love to read together. They will love to do research. They will love to look at like what sort of articles are being emerged in their industry on the topic of what they're working on. They will get on with that all day long. But where there might be tension is between these two people here, between that harmonious and that objective again. This person, SM, might be more inclined to not speak up. This person might be more inclined to just like rush in and be like, we got to talk about this thing. We got to figure this out. So that could show up as a tension point on the team. And then again, another area for potential conflict or tension is the majority of the team wants to collaborate. So these 3 over here is like, we should sit down and talk about this thing. Whereas this person over here is like, oh, one more meeting. What do we need a meeting for? Do we really need the meeting? So this knowing our team makeup can help really clarify who we are, how we play together, and how we play to our strengths. So I want to just quickly, Candace, in like 2 minutes, like you have 2 minutes to answer this. I asked the question at the beginning around return to the office. What are you seeing as a driving force that you think we really need to be mindful of when we are having these conversations with employees?
Yeah, so just, I love the question at the start of it, Carolyn, and under 2 minutes, I would say all of them. And I would say that, it's possible that any one of these or any bundle of these could be in the top 4 of the people that you're leading. And so understanding, or even just considering, if I'm making this decision, like just, what are some questions that I could ask that, if they're driving forces, they're driving forces. And so taking the definitions of each of these and almost creating a set of questions could be really interesting, especially as we're inviting feedback or considering decisions or communication about decisions in particular.
So keep employees' driving forces in mind with a set of questions in any of your return to the office style conversations.
Yeah. And I mean, the only other thing that I'll say at this point is just that where we run into trouble is when we take a one size fits all approach, especially around something as contentious as this. As you know, all of us have so many factors that are influencing how we feel about possibly going back to the office. And so being flexible, asking, listening, and being just understanding that it is not one size fits all.
Beautiful. Great. So my question, so you guys are going to get a little email from me today. In it is going to be this awesome PDF resource. Heartland, it's going to be in your inbox. You're going to love it. It helps you just like dial down a little bit more around each of the driving forces. So you can understand a little bit more about yourselves, but also understand a little bit more about some of your employees. So what's the value that they bring to the team, what stresses them, and what shows up in extreme situations. So this great little resource is coming your way. I want you to, this is the challenge, this is the coaching question, is like, pay attention to this now in your work. Pay attention to the places where you're like, yeah, I really got satisfaction out of that project that I did. Pay attention, what was the driving force that influenced that? And or you know what, we have this tricky situation between these employees right now. What's the driving force between the two of them that I think that is at play, that's influencing them? And how can I help orient them to be in better dialogue with one another around that so they can see each other? A great way to do that would be to have more of your employees doing a leadership assessment for themselves and then doing a debrief. So I've just little shameless plug here. We can do an assessment and then we can do a 2-hour one-on-one debrief, or we can do a team debrief and really talk about what that looks like for your organization.